friends. I'm here with Rabbi Dr. Erin Leib Smokler, who is the Director of Spiritual Development and Dean of Students at Yeshivat Maharaj Rabbinical School, where she teaches Chassidut and Pastoral Torah. She earned her PhD and MA from the University of Chicago's Committee on Social Thought and her BA from Harvard University. She's a Senior Rabbinic Fellow of the Shalom Hartman Institute, and she's currently at work on 2 books, Torah from the Plague and Torah of the Night. Thank you so much for taking time to talk.
Thank you for having me.
So we are in a strange, I want to say unprecedented, but I don't know enough history to say that, a strange moment. And I wonder, how is Torah speaking to you uniquely at this moment?
Okay. It's hard. It's certainly very hard. And I have found this to definitely be an experience of theological rupture, which in a certain sense is surprising. Let me say why. I've spent a great deal of my own kind of spiritual and intellectual energies, particularly thinking about theology and suffering, theology and the Holocaust in particular. I wrote my PhD on the Piasetzner Rabbi, the Rabbi of the Warsaw Ghetto. And so in certain ways, I've inhabited a space of uncertainty and pain and the theological ramifications thereof, in the abstract for quite some time. And so, of course, nothing is the same when you encounter it in vivo, as we say. And it reminds me a little bit of a passage from Brachot, where the concept of Yisurim Shel Ahava, or the chastisement or afflictions of love, is discussed. I think it's 5a, if I'm not mistaken. And the rabbis talk all about their theories of why suffering happens in the world. And that perhaps God loves us so much that God punishes us. And there are all kinds of interesting, again, theoretical approaches to why it is that people suffer in the world. And it's just on the very next page, on 5b, if I'm not mistaken, that several rabbis themselves suffer. And their students come and say, Chavivina lecha Yisurim, are your sufferings beloved to you? You, O rabbis, who theorized about suffering only moments ago, at least literarily speaking on the page. And these same rabbis say, lo hem velo scharam, like, no, thank you, not this and not their rewards, whatever it is that I imagined might be worth it or theologically somehow compelling no longer feels that way on a sick bed. And so I think that gap between the theoretical discussions on one page, and it's almost like on the next page, the door to the Beit Midrash or the House of Study is closed. You enter into the world and you realize that these theologies don't really hold up. And so on the one hand, I will just say that I take some support from a tradition that tells such stories about itself, that realizes that there are gaps between the theories we have about things and the experiences that we have about them, that realizes that even rabbis, even our spiritual leaders who might think that they have answers, really don't when they themselves are in that place of challenge. And owning that and reckoning with that, to me, is itself a place of pride, if not some kind of healing. So there's that. And I'll also say, on a related note, that I referenced before, the Piasetzner Rabbi, the Rabbi of the Warsaw Ghetto, who's a kind of Rabbi figure for me. And one of the teachings that I take from him is the kind of plasticity of theology, the ways that what one thinks one day need not hold up the next day, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're any less true, any less powerful, any less healing. So for him, and here I'm not saying that COVID and the Holocaust are the same thing, they're not, but what he said in 1939 was different from what he said in 1942, and his relationship to God really evolved and changed from week to week, and certainly over from year to year. So while that doesn't answer the question of who is God and what is God, the permission to evolve, the permission to protest, the permission to feel pain, the permission to feel confusion, the permission to sit in that place of not knowing, is for me very much what Torah opens for me at this moment.
Wow, very powerful, very powerful. So moving from the realm of questions and answers, the realm of truth, to the realm of experience and connection, there are those, of course, who believe we connect to the divine most deeply through joy. it's through the channel of simcha where we can truly access God most closely. But there are also those who understand that connection experience most happens through sorrow, through grief, through fear, through anxiety. And I wonder if you can kind of relate how you understand this type of religious experience. I mean, the Piaget's and Rabbi, of course, this notion of atzvut or of shvirat halev. But, I mean, how might we use these emotional moments as channels for connection?
Yeah, it's very much in the spirit of the Piaget's and Rabbi Nachman, who I think you're referencing, and others, to see points of pain as access points to the divine, which I hope is not to be understood as a veneration of pain or any kind of joy specifically in harm or self-harm. God forbid, God forbid. That is by no means the theological vantage point or the psychological emotional vantage point of these particular kinds of theologies. But I do think that there's a kind of way in which one can be kind of broken open to awareness, broken open to surprise and mystery, and a way in which experiences of the kind that we're going through, and here I mean both the physical illness as well as the churn of the world, the feeling that things are just unraveling and developing in so many ways, culturally, socially, racially, environmentally. Like, there's so many dimensions to the current moment, that I think one need not talk about it in terms of relating to God in pain, but relating to God in these moments that feel like they are ruptures that really, they really highlight what is unknown in the world. They really highlight the points of breakdown, but not only toward chaos, but just toward opening, if you know what I mean. So that we're left, instead of inhabiting a world that feels known and knowable, we're really confronted, I think, with a world that is so much bigger than ourselves, so much more complicated and sophisticated, and frankly, just unknown. And I think that absent these moments, be they global or personal, we sometimes get very, very complacent. And so this isn't a moment of godliness in terms of, in my experience, it's not about a feeling of divine closeness and love per se, but it is a reminder of the sort of grandeur and mystery of the world, in a way in which I and we are not gods, that there is so much that we do not understand, and so much that is not under our power.
Amazing. So on this point, I wonder how you think about, from an ethical perspective, progress. I mean, I was very influenced by Tamar Ross's Expanding the Palace of Torah, and that's on more of an ideological level. Reading Hegel and freedom. But modern Orthodoxy has most been guided, of course, by Rabbi Soloveitchik, who suggests that dignity is increased by gaining more control. We have more control. We have more dignity by being in control of our destiny. We don't just live by fate, but we're in control of our destiny. And then there's moments like this where we're smacked down, that there's no room for arrogance. No one could have predicted this state of the world. And as you just said, we're in a state of humility and to some degree powerlessness. And I wonder what Soloveitchik would have said about, dignity in a moment like this and how he understood this trajectory. But I wonder, how do you relate to, on a theological or ethical level, the notion of progress, and what moments like this politically and in terms of public health mean for such a notion?
Well, I really appreciate the word that you just used, which I don't think I used before, which is humility. And I think that's exactly what this does breed. And I think you're right that this is not a moment that speaks to Soloveitchikian majesty and human dignity, and Adam 1 kind of, takeover of technological world, etc. We're not living in that mode. I could try to sort of justify it in Soloveitchikian terms by going the Adam 2 route, but I don't know that we have to go there. I don't think that this moment is one of bolstering our power as human beings. I think it's really a reckoning with powerlessness, and I guess I would just have to part ways with that kind of ideology that sees human dignity and power as synonymous somehow, because I think that what we're seeing is that awareness of powerlessness is really the starting point, I think, to a spiritual awakening, I hope, and maybe to some kind of healing in the world. But it is the reckoning with powerlessness that I think is actually where we need to start our conversations.
So well said. So just one last question for you today. One of your writing projects right now, which I'm excited to read, Torah from the Plague. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What your vision is there?
Sure. So I'm very excited to say that I'm working with a whole bunch of really wonderful writers, academics, and rabbis who are really just reflecting on this moment from their particular vantage points. And I think that's something that we can do now. Again, lahavdil v'natzo lahavdil, drawing from the writings of Pia Zetzner. Now, what we can do, and here you and I are doing this right now, we can speculate and offer whatever kind of insights we might have at the moment that we may or may not agree with tomorrow or in 2 years from now. But there's a way in which we are also kind of testifying to the moment as we're doing that. So we're thinking about the moment, but we're also bearing witness to it. And so what I wanted to do with this project is just actually take the temperature of where we are at. What are people thinking in 2020 in the moment? Just like, again, there was post-Holocaust theology, and there will be reflections on this moment too, but there will be post facto. And I'm interested in how are we as a community, how are we thinking about theology? How are we thinking about prayer? How are we thinking historically about how this is or is not like previous experiences? How are we thinking about ourselves as global citizens? I think as Jews, we so often reflect in a very parochial way on our, history of various oppressions as Jews. But what does it mean to be global citizens and experience ourselves as in pain with the rest of the world in this era where we know about it, where we really know about it because of, technology and media and all of that.
So interesting. I think there's so many different experiences right now, and one, I think actually many are feeling very powerful, which it might be strange for some to hear, because so many of us feel so powerless, but they feel like I'm beating the plague. Like if I can beat the plague, I can beat anything. And that experience right now of where there can be hubris, around one's indestructibility is so radically different from someone who's, God forbid, on a ventilator right now, or their child's on a ventilator, or they just lost half their family, or the case. And so our experiences are so different. The one who's worried about putting their children, into school in a few weeks, so different from someone who just lost the child. And so I wonder how we tap into the full experience right now, and empathically and intellectually. And I'm so glad you're doing this work. So Rabbi, thank you for taking this time to talk.
Thank you. And thank you for all the good work you do.